Good morning. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished participants in the room and online, colleagues, friends. I see many of you here, and it's great to see you. I'm not sure when I will start getting bored of the live events, but I'm still, in that excitement mode of seeing people in person, meeting, discussing, exchanging ideas. And it's great to be here at the 8th Global Aid for Trade Review. It's the second day, and so far, so great. My name is Vanessa Erogbogbo. I'm the Chief of the Green and Inclusive Value Chain section at the International Trade Center. We're a joint technical assistance agency of the World Trade Organization and the United Nations. I'm really pleased to be your moderator for this plenary session, Sustainable Aid for Trade, which will focus on how the Aid for Trade initiative can support a just, low carbon transition and help develop critical trade infrastructure while supporting resilient, environmentally sustainable, and inclusive trade outcomes. And today I'm joined by an exciting and distinguished group of speakers, both here in person and online, and I will introduce them momentarily. But for now, let's start with opening remarks from Ambassador Jiangchen Zhang, Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization. Ambassador Zhang, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vanessa. Good morning, dear colleagues. Trade can be a powerful force for change. Our Director General, Dr. Ngozi, has reiterated several times that trade and the WTO are part of the solution to climate change and environmental degradation. Climate change is one of the most pressing challenges of our time. The World Bank estimates that natural disaster already cost low and middle-income countries $390 billion per year in damage related to water, transport, and power infrastructure. In that context, adapting to climate change by reducing climate-related risks and vulnerability is a key economic strategy. International trade can contribute to climate change adaptation efforts by enforcing economic resilience to extreme weather events through diversified supply chains, timely provision of essential goods and services, improved food security, and greater access to climate-related adaptation technologies. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change is also essential. The transition to a low-carbon economy entails a substantive transformation of energy, production, transport, and the land use system. The International Agency of Energy estimates that meeting Paris Agreement targets would require annual clean energy investment to triple to $4 trillion by 2030. Ensuring sustainable infrastructure will be a critical determinant of future growth and prosperity. A green transition also brings employment opportunities. ILO estimates that 24 million jobs worldwide could be created by the green economy by 2030, a net increase of 18 million. Open trade plays a critical role in providing affordable access to advanced technology needed to transition to a low-carbon economy. Lowering barriers to trading environmental goods and services helps facilitate transfer and the deployment of climate change mitigation and adaptation technologies. 85% of members who responded to 2022 WTO OECD Aid for Trade monitoring and evaluation questionnaires observed that their domestic trade objective address environmental concerns. This shows a resolve among the membership to use trade as a tool for sustainable development. We must facilitate this process by ensuring members, especially developing countries and LDCs, have the necessary resources to pursue trade and sustainability objectives. Aid for trade can play an essential role in channeling the resources to realize a just green transition for developing countries. The Aid for Trade initiative has continued to gather strength with consistent year-on-year gains since inception. In sum, more than $556 billion of aid for trade has been dispersed globally to address trade-related constraints of developing countries and LDCs. In fact, a record high disbursement value of $48.7 billion was recorded in 2020. This is despite the uncertainties caused by budgetary constraint and the pandemic-led effect over recent years. What is very interesting to note is that 51% of aid for trade commitment made in 2020 include climate-related objectives. A majority of this climate-tagged funding, around 40%, has been allocated for LDCs. We also see a realignment of aid for trade priorities on a sectoral level within the energy sector, which can contribute a large share of total greenhouse gas emissions. More and more support is being rechanneled to support renewables. Aid for trade disbursement towards renewable sources increased by 36% between 2019 and 2020. During the same period, the share of disbursement to non-renewable sources actually decreased by 26%. The WTO membership has taken active steps to do their part in facilitating a transition to sustainable development. Initiatives such as trade and environmental sustainability structure discussions, the informal dialogue on plastic pollution and sustainable plastic trade, and the fossil fuel subsidy reform stand treatment, fossil fuel subsidy reform stand testament to members' commitment to bring forth change. The agreement on fishery subsidies, which was agreed upon during the ministerial conference last month, is another example of this commitment. The agreement serves as an indication of a member's interest in tackling climate and the sustainability issues within the framework of the WTO. Though we see progress in aid for trade and momentum at the WTO, the rate of change is not enough. We continue to fall short of the 100 billion a year target that we set for climate finance by 2020. There remains a substantial gap between what is required and what has been provisioned. Developing countries and LDC urgently require support to implement climate-smart infrastructure and recast local production towards sustainability. We are not using the full potential of the multilateral trading system to accelerate the pace of change to adapt and mitigate climate change. This is not to say that we have not made advancement. Developing countries and LDCs have taken leadership in many aspects. Several impressive projects in these countries are flag barriers for sustainable development. During this session, for instance, you will hear more about the Lake Tagahana wind power project from Kenya, which makes for the fascinating story. I hope the discussion that we will be having today pave way for a better understanding of the current state of play. I also hope that the discussion will highlight steps we can take as an international community to accelerate the move towards sustainable aid for trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DDG Zhang, for those illuminating remarks. I hope that we will live up to your expectations for the discussion this morning. A few of my takeaways from your remarks, I think First of all, underscoring the importance of multilateral cooperation for sustainable development, and the DDG referenced in his remarks, the discussions ongoing here at the WTO. He also talked about rising interest in sustainability from the WTO membership, and he emphasized a pressing need for accelerating the shift towards sustainable aid for trade. From all the numbers that the DGG gave, I think it will be very expensive. A lot of resources will be required, and those resources are required urgently. So he also talked about aid for trade playing a role in channeling these resources, and spoke about a realignment towards the energy sector, which we'll talk quite a bit about this morning. So discussions during this session will cover two broad themes. The first part of the discussion will talk about trade-related infrastructure, especially in the context of renewable energy. And then in the second part of the discussion, we'll talk about trade-related capacity building, especially around circular economy and the issue of plastics trade. So I'm pleased to welcome finally the speakers and in the order in which they'll speak. Usually I am on the receiving end of having my name butchered, but this morning I will be the butcher of names, so forgive me in advance. First, I'll start with Felix Rotman. He's the Environmental, Social and Corporate Governance Manager at Lake Turkana Wind Power. Felix is also the Director of Winds of Change, a sustainable community development project undertaken by the Lake Turkana Wind Power Project. And then we will have Mr. Song Dongsheng, independent advisor specializing in power and infrastructure, and he is also the former chairman of Sino-Hydro. Sarah An is here with us in the room. She's the Director General of the International Economic Affairs Bureau at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Korea. Kate White is the Director of Economic Security at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom. Ambassador Luis Baez is Vice Minister at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Ecuador. Patrick Schroeder, also here with us in the room, is Senior Research Fellow, the Environment and Society Program at Chatham House. And Patrick Verkuyen is founder and CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation, and he's with us online. For me, it's been really encouraging to see developing countries and LDCs take leadership in some areas of climate mitigation. And we see this particularly in the area of renewable energy infrastructure. In fact, many developing countries are working at the frontier of renewables output and capacity. So I wasn't surprised at all to hear about the Lake Turkana Wind Power Project in Kenya, one such example of a success story set in the development context. It is the largest onshore wind power project in Africa, and it's helped enhance Kenya's green energy potential while also promoting energy security and job creation. I wasn't surprised to hear about it because I recently read an article in the Financial Times by David Pilling, which reported that renewable energy accounts for 75% of Kenya's electricity generation, and that 22 countries in the African continent already use renewables as the main source of electricity. The question is, will renewables provide the energy intensity required for the continent's industrialization needs? Perhaps we'll get a sense of that when we hear from Felix. Without further ado, Felix, are you online? If you are, please tell us about the Lake Turkana Wind Power Project. Give us a sense of the output, the scale, the benefits. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Good morning, Vanessa, and thanks for that. I think you've done well not to butcher any names there, so just as a side note already. Good morning, everyone again. I'm actually calling
Kenya stands tall amongst African countries when...
Sorry, shall I go again, or will you mute the video?
Please go ahead.
Yeah?
Go again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go again? Okay. Okay, yeah, so I'm actually calling in today from the Lake Turkana Wind Power Project, which is located in northern Kenya in Marsabit County, which itself is one of the most remote and poor counties across Kenya. It is the largest wind farm in Africa, consisting of 365 wind turbines, basically one for every day of the year. And we have been operational since September 2018. We produce 310 megawatts of cheap and clean energy, and the total development cost of this project was 630 million euros, which makes it the largest private investment in Kenya. From a technical aspect, for those who are interested, last year, for example, we produced 1.7 million megawatts hours of energy. That is equivalent to powering 500,000 European city homes on a daily basis. And what is very impressive of this site where we are located is that we are able to operate at an average capacity factor of 58%. What that means is that the wind farm is running at maximum 58% of the time. Now, that might not sound like a high number for those who don't work in the wind industry, but it is actually a huge number in the wind industry. In comparison, most wind farms in Europe have a capacity factor of 35%. So we're operating almost 25% above that comparative level. We produce electricity, which equates to 14% of Kenya's total installed capacity. This actually goes up to about 30% at night, essentially meaning that the wind farm is powering every third, every fourth light bulb in everyone's house in this country. The situation in Kenya is very impressive, as Vanessa mentioned. 75% of the energy in Kenya is being produced through renewables, which is very admirable for many, many reasons. At Lake Turkana Wind Power, sustainability is key. It has always been key. It has always been a central discussion, even during the development phase. We are obliged to work towards the IFC performance standards on environmental and social sustainability, against which we are monitored every 3 months. Essentially, that means that we had to develop very sound processes through which to identify potential environmental and social impacts, potential risks, and then develop mitigation measures on how to manage them, related to labor, to working conditions, environmental conservation, land acquisition, indigenous people's issues, human rights, and so on and so forth. So it's quite a broad spectrum, which we need to kind of constantly work towards and make sure we're performing as expected. The project has had a fundamental but a hugely significant impact in this area. We had to construct 200 kilometers of road to get to where the wind farm is. This in itself has opened up the area. You all work in trade, so you can appreciate a road like that reduces travel time. It increased the amount of public transportation. It reduced the cost of traveling because obviously there was more vehicle supply, less maintenance to vehicle owners, and essentially increased and for some communities established access to services, right? Whether it's health facilities, education facilities, but also markets, which is very important. The wind farm itself as well, we are in a very remote area. We are in an area that was largely known for insecurity because of tribal clashes related to livestock raiding. The wind farm's presence itself, the associated road, the fact that we are the largest employer in Marsabit County, employ people from the local areas, has led to significant security improvements. It is now one of the safer, if not one of the safest areas across northern Kenya, where we are currently located. Employment has been a big impact to the area over here. From day one, when we started construction in October 2014, we became the largest employer in the largest county in Kenya. We employed a total of 2,500 people during construction. And today in operations, we are employing 330 people, of whom 85% come from Marsabit County. So you can imagine the amount of training that goes on to bring up the skills to what is necessary. 14% of our labor force comes from Kenya, and we only have 4 expats, which is very unique in a context like this, in a country like Kenya, for a project of this scale. And then finally, the Lake Turkana Wind Power Project established an NGO, which is called the Winds of Change. And Winds of Change essentially is the arm through which we implement community development projects, which help to improve local livelihoods, primarily focusing on education, on health, on water and livelihoods itself. To date, we have implemented more than 80 meaningful, I'd say, community projects since June 2015, that is, and we have reached about 500,000 people in this area. We have also, by virtue of being such a big entity in such a remote area, such a poor location, we are often asked to support in situations of emergency. This morning, for example, there was a phone call of a lady from a hospital where a lady was having complications delivering a baby, and we are asked if our ambulance can take her to the nearest referral hospital. Kenya is currently going through a severe drought situation. And in response to that, for example, Lake Turkana Wind Power implemented an emergency food relief program in January until March of this year, whereby we fed every primary school-aged child for 2 months. Basically 13,000 children across 60 schools, every day, 1 meal. And that was important, not just because food is important and people need to eat something, but also the schools were seeing significant dropouts in terms of kids going to school because the parents couldn't afford it, but also if you go to school, you didn't have a meal. So providing food in schools was a magnet to bringing kids back into education, which again is so important for the communities here to be able to develop and move forward. So I know I've gone over my 3 minutes. There's a lot to say for such a unique project. I'd love to speak to people on another day for those who are interested, but that's a bit of an overview in as quick as possible manner from me here in Kenya. I was hoping to show you some turbines in the background, but way too windy for that.
So the perfect conditions then. Thank you so much, Felix. That was actually, I was astonished listening to you speak, and it was well worth the time. And I actually wish you had much more time. I was astonished. That's impressive to hear about those spillover effects, beyond the environmental and economic benefits, the development effects, social benefits, employment, education, raising the skills levels in the area where the farm is located. That sounds like such an exciting project. If you would, I do have one additional question that I wanted to ask you. This was a huge undertaking, and you must have faced significant challenges. Would you be able to highlight some of the key obstacles, how you overcame them, and maybe talk a little bit about how you were able to secure the financing for this project, which I think you said it was 600 million euros, 600 million odd euros. Thanks, Felix.
Yeah, absolutely. Challenges, many challenges for a project of this scale in the context like this. One of the major challenges was that, we had to build the project from scratch. And what I mean with that is people think they built a wind turbine, they put up some wind turbines and that was it. We had to develop all the infrastructure around to enable us to get to a position to be able to put up turbines, right? So we had to build a 28-kilometer road from Laisamis to Sarima, where we are located. We had to build accommodation camps. We had to build a clinic. We had to convince the Safaricom, which is one of the biggest phone network providers in Kenya. We had to convince them to come here and put up a tower so we had phone access. Essentially, putting up the turbines was the easiest thing, but in terms of challenges, it was developing all the infrastructure around to enable us to be here to put up the turbines. That was complicated. You're talking about logistics. Turbines are coming, from Denmark via China. Road material is being procured in Kenya but being built by companies from abroad. RXPE, which is a big Chinese company, is bringing in equipment to build a STATCOM, which essentially regulates the frequency of our energy. Siemens from France was coming in to build a substation. So logistically, huge challenge to build a project like this in a location that like that we're in. And then kind of hand in hand with that is building community trust, right? This is You can hardly go any further north than where we are in Kenya. It's a part of the country that was largely ignored politically by government until we had a new constitution in 2010. So you have people here who are very skeptical. You have people here who are used to hearing many, many promises, but those promises are not being fulfilled. And so we had to have quite a dedicated and well thought out strategy on how we communicate with communities, how we involve them in identifying impacts, risks, mitigation measures, and then making sure that, you know, if we make commitments, we had to uphold them. We had to meet those commitments. And that continues until today, because sometimes it's easier to say something that is not accurate than it is to say something that is honest and accurate, because you know, sometimes you might hurt people's feelings by telling them you can't support with a certain issue. But what we have tried to do throughout this whole journey is to always be honest. If we have to have a hard conversation, let's have a hard conversation. If we're able to support, let's support. If we can't, let's say we can't. But let's not just, you know, increase people's hopes and then not deliver on that. And that approach has served us very well. I mean, we have a very strong community support across a large area. You know, the wind farm sits on 40,000 acres, which is the same size as Nairobi City. So for those who've been to Nairobi, the wind farm basically covers that scale. And then we operate with communities across 22,000 square kilometers. That's roughly a third the size of Holland. That's the area in which we operate with communities. So you can imagine the dynamics, the politics, the community needs, the expectations, which need to be managed in that sense. That's incredibly challenging.
Thank you, Felix. I'm going to have to interrupt you. I could listen to you all day, but I'm going to have to interrupt you. And perhaps if we get time, which I guess we won't, it would be great to hear from you right at the end about, you know, plans for maintenance, management of waste, you know, as you go on in the years with the project. I think that those, I guess, are some of the other considerations that you're having to contend with in the project. Thank you so much. That was extremely interesting. And from wind, we're going to turn to hydro. Mr. Song, I'm going to turn over to you. Hydroelectricity is the largest source of renewable energy worldwide. In fact, 90 to 100% of electricity generated in Nepal, Bhutan, and Ethiopia are derived from hydropower. In my own country, Uganda, 78% of electric power is generated by hydropower. What role do you think hydropower could play in the low carbon transition, Mr. Song? Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to His Excellency, Mr. Dan Xiangchen, and thank you all. I'm honored to be here. In 2021, the global installed hydropower capacity was 136 gigawatts, accounting for 17% of global total installed capacity. In 35 countries, hydropower supply more than half of its electricity consumptions. China, Brazil, United States, Canada, and Russia are the top 5 countries in hydropower installation. Hydropower stations are divided into 2 categories. One is conventional hydropower. The other one is pump storage hydropower. Conventional hydropower can also be divided in 2 categories also. One is with reservoir. The other is without reservoir. Hydropower station with reservoir has the ability to store energy and regulate it. For example, Kariba Reservoir in Zambia, a Volta Reservoir in Ghana, we can treat these 2 big reservoirs as 2 huge batteries. And in your home country, Uganda, we built the Karuma, the hydropower with reservoir also, but not very big. Pump storage hydropower is the most mutual and widely used large-scale energy storage technology. In 2020, pump storage plants accounted for 90.3% of global energy storage capacity. Australia National University identified 616,000 potential sites for hydropower storage hydropower globally. The disadvantage of hydropower is the limitation of resources and uneven distribution. Therefore, we need wind power, we need solar power. The wind power and PV solar are random and intermittent. Its large-scale connection to the power grid will lead to great challenges to the safety and the stability of power grid and power quality. Hydropower is different. Hydropower is not only clean energy, but hydropower has good capacity of storage and regulation also. So hydropower is an ideal implemented to wind and solar power. We can see hydropower and pump storage hydropower play very important, unique, and irreplaceable roles in zero carbon transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really interesting advantages, disadvantages, but also, an important part of a mix of different sources of renewable energies. A question that arises is the issue of the impact of climate change on hydropower prospects. We hear about droughts, floods. How would those impact hydropower productivity and predictability as a reliable energy source? Don't know about the rest of you, but this month in Europe, in Geneva, certainly has been extremely dry. I was listening to the radio this morning. The UK is going to have possibly the driest July since 1911. In Uganda, hearing about droughts. How does these weather events affect the reliability of hydropower, Mr. Song?
Okay, thank you. It's true, extreme weather such as droughts and floods are causing more and more natural disaster to human beings. So the pressure to control emissions is growing faster. We hope the world leaders can think and make decisions in the perspective of all mankind, rather than a group, a nation, a country, or even their personal dislike or dislikes. So your question is good question. So in fact, in addition to power generation, the other two very important functions of hydropower are flood control and water supply or irrigation. The construction of reservoirs and hydropower stations are important measures to deal with droughts and floods. China has the largest number of dams in the world. The US ranks the second with 10,000 dams in the world. We can take Hoover Dam, very famous Hoover Dam in US is an example to see what dams and hydropower can do for human beings. Hoover Dam installed capacity is 2,542 megawatts. Its reservoir, the lake meet storage capacity is about 35 billion cubic meters. The dam is used for flood and salt control, power generation, agriculture, irrigation, and water supply. The reservoir reduced the Colorado River's peak flow from 8,500 cubic meter per second to 2,120 cubic meter per second. Irrigates 700,000 hectares of desert land to provide annual water for 32 million families. You can see the Hoover Dam, how important the Hoover Dam is for US. So we can find many other similar dams, hydropower in worldwide. It's Africa, many big dams also. Drought and flood not only affect the power generation, but only affect the survival of human beings. To solve this problem, we need to control global warming. But the more direct way is to build more dams, to build more reservoir hydropower. Developed countries have already built many dams, and they already developed, basically fully developed their water hydropower resources. But now I believe international community should not restrict the construction of dams, hydropower in developing countries. Modern technology can already solve the negative impact of dams. Therefore, international community should support developing countries to build more dams to develop more hydropower projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A really interesting perspective on that. And maybe if I'm going to ask a brief, very, very brief reflections on your views on China's own progress and future in the renewable energy transition, given the great progress already. Mr. Song, are you there? If you could just give us a quick reflection on China's own progress.
Okay. So I can give you an example. 10 years ago, 2011, the installed capacity of Chinese wind power and solar power was 52 gigawatts. Last year, 2021, it was 632 gigawatts, which means the increase of 123 times in last 10 years. You can see the renewable energy developing very fast in China. Chinese energy transition is obviously a huge challenge because Chinese energy structure is dominated by coal. By the end of 2021, Chinese installed coal-fired power plant reached to 1,110 gigawatts. So according to nearly 47 of total installed capacity, but China has solemnly pledged to be carbon neutral by before 2060. So, and the energy transition must be completed before 2060 also. Looking at the past decades, the speed of renewable energy, and also looking at the Chinese renewable energy development plans. So I'm quite confident China can do it. In fact, you know, as I was chairman of China Hydro and president of Power China International, we have done a lot of renewable energy projects worldwide, including hydropower, solar, and wind power also. Yeah. So we have made a lot of contribution to the worldwide electrification and energy transition. Energy transition is a matter for all mankind. Where developed countries are concerned about their own energy transition, they should also pay attention to energy shortage of developing countries, especially those in sub-Saharan Africa. Electrification rate in sub-Saharan Africa is less than 50%, and nearly 600 million population don't have access to electricity. Advances in renewable energy technology, especially distributed solar power, smart hydro, microgrid, and isolated grid technologies have provided a technically and economically viable way for sub-Saharan Africa countries to meet their electrification target.
Mr. Song, thank you very much. I'm going to have to interrupt you there. Everyone's really interested, and it's, you know, lots of interesting ideas, information, but we're going to have to move on. And I really won't have time to come back at the end of the session, but, you know, thank you very, very much for your contribution. And I wanted to highlight, you know, that this issue of energy and moving to renewables is highly relevant in a very practical way in the context of aid for trade. ITC itself has been working with companies who have been making the shift. These are small businesses who have been shifting to renewables. I'll give an example of the garment sector, where we worked with 50 businesses that, amongst other measures, switched to renewables and had cost savings of over $2 million on an annual basis. So this is a really relevant aspect for aid for trade. I'm going to turn now to DG An, who's here with us in the room, to talk a little bit about the perspective of the government of the Republic of Korea. Korea is a global advocate of the climate transition, vital supporter of the Aid for Trade initiative. How will Korea look to scale up its aid for trade towards climate objectives? Thanks.
Thanks. Let me start by thanking the British Secretariat Development Division for the invitation. I'm delighted to have the chance to share perspectives on how Korea is harnessing the LDA to support climate transition. Promoting green transition and sustainable development in recipient countries is increasingly important part of Korea's aid for trade and indeed official development assistance more broadly. Climate action is a salient feature of Korea's midterm strategy for international development cooperation 2021 to 2025. Project on renewable energy and climate change responsive are priority projects that are entitled to preferential conditions in obtaining EDC of development loans. Korea also has been offering financial contributions to developing countries through Green Climate Fund or GCF, Global Green Growth Institutes, GGGI, and UNFCCC. And we've been pledging more financial contribution to these institutions to help developing countries to tackle climate change. In addition, support for mitigation and adaptation efforts has been the major part of Korea's aid throughout the previous decades. We plan to expand climate and green ODA programs over the coming years. Last year, the amount of the aid disbursed in support of SDG 13 on climate action and SDG 7 on affordable and clean energy was nearly $900 million. Given that the year 2021 was a year with when the need for pandemic-related assistance was overwhelming, it is noteworthy that Korea was nonetheless able to devote nearly 30% of its aid to supporting green transition in the world. Korea's aid for trade to help promote green transition extends here to Geneva. Just last month, Korea International Cooperation Agency and the Geneva-based International Trade Center signed a $5 million grant arrangement to enhance the resilience of farmers in Uganda to natural disasters exacerbated by climate change. The project will support 10,000 agricultural households to increase the value of their production by adapting to climate risk and assist them in linking up to international markets through greener trade. We'd like to thank ITC Deputy Executive Director Dorothy Tembo for personally gracing the event with their presence.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the support to ITC. It's really important for us to be able to get on the ground and work with businesses, entrepreneurs, producers. Moving a bit towards away from that. Yesterday, DG Ngozi coined a phrase which I liked very, very much. She talks about framing aid for trade as investment for trade, and she emphasized the importance of crowding in the private sector to complement strategically placed aid for trade. So, you know, there's this interest in boosting climate finance effectiveness by aligning ODA with private sector capacity. Do you see this as an effective strategy going forward?
I was going to start answering that question by echoing what DG Ngozi said yesterday. Yes, I believe the investment trade is based on the assumption that the private sector is an indispensable partner. Korea was long recognized the importance of partnering with private sector in international development cooperation. Partnering with private sector is vital, not only to mobilize additional resources for development project, but also to enhance their effectiveness by leveraging the unique expertise of private sector. To be more specific, Korea introduced Development Alliance Korea in 2012. This initiative is a public-private partnership platform joined by government, private sector, civil society, and academia with the aim of achieving the SDGs, including those relating to climate action and clean energy. Korea has established public-private partnership loans in our EDCF program to fund large-scale infrastructure projects in developing countries. The government has also been forging a strategic partnership with global Korean companies to support sustainable and inclusive development of the local communities in host countries under the Inclusive Business Solution Program. Building upon the traditional corporate social responsibility activities, our development cooperation project has placed more emphasis on integrating the local community into companies' value chains and helping to address social problems of the community. Another example of our public-private partnership program is called Creative Technology Solutions, CTS program. Through this initiative, we aim to help strengthen the private sector's capacity to address development problems by applying innovative ideas and technologies of youth entrepreneurs and startups of the host country itself in ODA project. Numerous CTS programs have been designed and implemented since 2015, and they have been conducive to solving development problems in many countries, primarily in the health, education, environment, and energy sectors. Korea also supports public-private partnership for climate action in developing countries in our collaboration with multilateral institutions such as Green Climate Fund.
Thank you very much, and I hope I'll have a chance to chat with you a bit even after the session. Really interesting initiatives that you're undertaking there. And of course, there's rarely a panel that I'm on that I don't talk about the issue of gender as well. And I'd like to get your take on the intersection between sustainability and gender empowerment. In fact, according to the Global Aid for Trade Review M&E questionnaire, 80% of funders and developing country partners who responded highlighted the importance of aligning these goals. What's your take?
As reiterated throughout this global review, Korea also attached importance to aligning the goal of sustainability with gender empowerment. In many rural areas of developing countries and LDCs, high poverty incidence and climate vulnerability result in poor quality produce and dismal market access, especially for women farmers. Against this backdrop, I'd like to introduce some examples of Korea's assistance for women. With regard to gender empowerment, we've expanded aid for gender equality and women's empowerment from fairly insubstantial level in mid-2000 to significant levels today. OECD figures show that Korea committed 28% of its screened bilateral aid, equal to $577 million, to supporting women's empowerment in 2020. KOICA also has a midterm strategy that indicates economic empowerment for gender equality, under which empowerment practice priorities are important consideration in designing and screening new KOICA project. We've also been collaborating with the International Trade Center on this front as well. Through its flagship She Trade initiative, ITC has been helping to connect women entrepreneurs to international markets. Since 2019, KOICA has been collaborating with ITC under the She Trade initiative to help 10,000 women farmers in 4 West African countries to market their produce internationally, thereby helping to make global value chains more inclusive. Korea has expanded its partnership with ITC recently to help youth entrepreneurship in Africa as well. Also, Korea has been collaborating with the Global Green Growth Institute to provide technical assistance and financing to enhance climate resilience of women smallholder farmers in developing countries. It is hoped that despite vulnerability to the adverse climate change impacts, empowered women farmers become financially more independent as their incomes increase and their families enjoy better quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to go back online. Would like to introduce Kate White to the conversation. And Kate, could you tell us a bit about the state of play in the UK? What are the climate priorities post COP26?
Yes, well, thank you very much. And let me just say, I'm absolutely delighted to be asked to speak about sustainable aid for trade at today's Day 2 plenary. This is a subject which the United Kingdom cares very deeply about. As you've already alluded to, Vanessa, the global climate continues to heat. We saw some of the impacts just last week in Europe, baking in record-breaking temperatures. And with trade recognized as such an integral part of the transition to a low-carbon economic growth and development trajectory, it feels very right that this year's Aid for Trade review has such a strong focus on climate and on sustainability. So trade and investment policies profoundly affect climate change and our emission trajectory. And in multilateral Geneva, we have to collectively work towards avoiding siloed approaches so that we can minimize the impacts of trade on climate and vice versa. And recognizing in particular that many least developed countries and small economies are the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So going back just to the end of last year at COP26, all 197 parties agreed to the historic Glasgow Climate Pact to take concerted and urgent action in this critical decade to keep the 1.5 degrees centigrade goal in reach. And that pact called on countries to phase down unabated coal power and to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. It requested countries by the end of this year, 2022, to revisit and strengthen their NDCs. It urged developed countries to scale up climate finance and to double finance for adaptation by 2025. And it also underlined the central importance of adaptation, the dangers of loss and damage, the need to boost action and support for both. And the voices and concerns of developing countries were central to these discussions, and the summit outcomes reflect this. More public and private finance than ever before have been mobilized to support developing countries to take climate action, and the UK itself doubled our international climate finance fund to £11.6 billion over 5 years. Now, much has happened in the 9 months since COP26. The geopolitical landscape of our world has shifted dramatically, not least because of Russia's unprovoked and illegal invasion of Ukraine and rising global energy prices. These crises underscore the need to accelerate that global transition to clean, reliable sources of power. Renewables and energy efficiency provide the quickest, cheapest, most reliable route to long-term climate and energy security and long-term prosperity. So now is the time to double down on those actions agreed at COP26 to tackle climate change and our economy's dependencies on fossil fuel. So just a few examples of actions and next steps that we will be emphasizing. So on mitigation, we continue to urge countries to submit any outstanding NDCs, to revisit and strengthen existing NDCs in 2022, and seek long-term strategies aligned with net zero. On finance, the German and Canadian governments are coordinating a progress update ahead of COP26 on the $100 billion delivery plan published last year. And alongside the Egyptian incoming COP27 presidency and the UN climate change high-level champions, we've also announced a new independent high-level expert group on investment in climate action. The group will deliver policy options to encourage and enable the investment and finance necessary for delivery of the Paris Agreement and the Glasgow Climate Pact. On adaptation and loss and damage, we launched the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work programme on the global goal on adaptation, GLASS, which will deliver action to reduce vulnerability, it will strengthen resilience, and increase the capacity of people and the planet to adapt to the impacts of climate change. We also commenced work to kickstart the Santiago network to provide technical assistance on loss and damage. On road transport, we were thrilled to announce over 100 signatories, including Canada, Mexico, BY Autos, and GM to the Zero Emission Vehicle Declaration, who committed to rapidly accelerate the transition to zero emission vehicles so that all new cars and vans are zero emission globally by 2040 or 2035 in leading markets. And since COP26, momentum has continued to build with further 22 signatories to the declaration. The COP process obviously is only as strong as the sum of its parts. So we need every country to pick up the pace, increase ambition and deliver together. And the UK will remain resolutely focused on working with all of our international partners and the incoming Egyptian COP presidency to realise the promises we made in Glasgow, and to work on the things that we do here at the WTO, at the Committee on Trade and Environment and TESED. That is also crucial to finding shared solutions to critical issues such as carbon leakage, plastic pollution, and fossil fuel subsidy reform. So continue to encourage members to be actively involved in those discussions. And the more that we join together in these efforts, the better they will be at addressing environmental challenges and climate change.
Thank you very much, Kate. I was there in Glasgow with my executive director, Pamela Coke-Hamilton. I enjoyed a lot of haggis. I think I had haggis for every meal, including breakfast. But the point I'm trying to make isn't about my meals, but rather that, we think and we work with small businesses and entrepreneurs to raise their climate ambition and to contribute to helping countries be able to raise their climate ambition. And I think for us, what we saw was that the small business and entrepreneurship perspective could perhaps be strengthened. We stand ready to work with the Egyptian presidency, any partner countries, any of you who would like to join forces in this endeavor to make sure that we bring in, the small business community and industry to work on this together. So turning now to your own development strategy, could you tell us a bit about what the UK International Development Strategy is doing to promote sustainable development?
Yes, of course. So launched in May this year, the UK has a new international development strategy. And among other things, that underlines how trade is crucial to lifting developing countries out of poverty. And it's a strategy which builds on a very proud record that we have in the UK of offering global leadership on these issues. It will put trade, climate, and development at the very heart of the UK's foreign policy. And in doing so, we aim to deepen economic, security, and development ties globally, while also delivering jobs and growth in both our country and our developing country partners. One of the key new pillars of this strategy are what we are calling British investment partnerships, which are going to mobilise UK-backed public and private finance for developing countries. And our commitment is to mobilise up to £8 billion of UK-backed financing per year by 2025, targeting the main barriers to investment in the developing world and partnering with capital markets and sovereign wealth funds to co-invest in projects and provide scale. We have a Clean Green initiative, which was launched by the UK at COP26, and that is the climate pillar of the British investment partnerships. We're going to be supporting countries to mobilise public and private finance to deliver on their climate ambitions and grow their economies sustainably, including through the Just Energy Transition Partnerships with partners like South Africa. These will provide a platform for low and middle income countries to work with climate finance donors, international finance institutions, and private investors to achieve a just energy transition, helping them to deliver on each and every one of their NDC commitments. And this work is going to be flanked with new UK centres of expertise, and these are being designed to provide a route for partner governments to access UK expertise from the UK private sector or academia, or the British government or other institutions. And these will focus on green, inclusive growth, including sectors such as manufacturing and agriculture, on infrastructure, on public finance, financial services and trade. And these centres of expertise will build on existing UK expertise, evidence and technology in these sectors. Amongst those, we will have a trade centre of expertise, in particular, to be a one-stop shop offer, to tap into both policy expertise and technical assistance via our Aid for Trade programmes. Those are just a few examples.
They're great examples, really interesting. And I think Dr. Ngozi would allow you to use the phrase invest for trade for free. You know, she won't charge you to use that phrase because it sounds like exactly what she was describing yesterday needs to be done. And then a final one, if you could very, very briefly, you know, tell us maybe, are there any other programs that you wanted to highlight, or are you okay to stop there?
Well, yes, I could just very briefly. I think one of the key issues today is about orienting development finance to support climate action. And, you know, this is something that underpins all of our thinking about our wider programs. And we are adapting our Aid for Trade and wider programs to support the green transition. And just to give a couple of examples, we have the UK Partnering for Accelerated Climate Transitions, UK PACT, and we're working with producers of cocoa and other forest commodities in Nigeria to improve sustainable international trade by providing zero deforestation assurances for export markets and providing fairer access into the UK, EU and US markets. Other programs under UK PACT in Kenya, through our contribution elsewhere to the World Bank and the EIF Trade Strategy Programme, we're helping governments and businesses to build capability in sustainable trade. For example, supporting more ecological systems for leather tanning in Chad, and delivering training in sustainable fishing practices in Madagascar. And finally, to tackle plastic and manufacturing pollution, we are providing up to 24.6 million over 2018 to 2024 to implement the sustainable manufacturing and environmental pollution research programme. And that's in partnership with the UN's Conference on Trade and Development. So just a few examples, but you know, to illustrate the way that we are absolutely embedding these principles of sustainability across a very, very wide range of our thinking and action on programs.
Thank you very, very much. Lots of interesting stuff going on there. So we're going to swiftly turn to the second part of our discussions. A bit more exchange to go. Ambassador Luis Valles, I think you're still on the line. Ecuador has been a leader in sustainable development. Could you give us some thoughts, some of your thoughts on how Ecuador foresees this transition?
Thank you very much, and good morning, Vanessa, and good morning, DGG Shang. It's nice to see you. And well, first of all, let me thank you for organizing this important event, and also to thank WTO and ITC for their efforts towards securing the trade, that the trade and environment is a central point in the Aid for Trade agenda. And also, I would like to thank all the panelists for the insightful and important remarks. I should start saying that Ecuador is a mega diverse country, and we are proud to be a mega diverse country. We have the coastal area, we have the Galapagos Islands, we have the Andes Mountains, and we have also the Amazon jungle. Thinking of this and also preserving biodiversity in Ecuador is quite important. And we are working in different levels. We are working at the national level, we are working at the international level. At the national level, it's important to say that we work with legislation, we have implemented new laws, we have also worked a lot in public policies in the public sector, also with the private sector, and also education is quite important. To mention the most important or central point to work in this issue here internally in Ecuador, I have to say that for us is quite important to say that political policies, I mean public policies in ecological transitions are quite important. We have incorporated innovative solutions and transition seeking to tackle the global or the three global crises: pollution, climate change, and also loss of biodiversity, while generating livelihoods to the people that depends of these resources. We focus also very much in the Galapagos Islands and its biodiversity. We have expand the Galapagos Marine Reserve. We had already a marine reserve in the Galapagos Island, and we have expanded last January 60,000 more square kilometers. So we have around 200,000 square kilometers of marine reserve. We are working also quite closely with Colombia, Costa Rica, and Panama, also to preserve marine corridors among these three countries. We have, as I mentioned before, a strong foreign policy. Engaged in the international, Ecuador is very engaged in the international agenda for environment, with long story in also leading environmental debates. And I would like to mention in this case, for instance, the work that Ecuador has done in the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm conventions. For instance, Ecuador was the first country to mention during a conference of the party of the Basel Convention the need to have a legally binding international instrument on plastic pollution. At the WTO, we are, as it was mentioned too, we are co-coordinating the informal dialogue for plastic pollution. And it's good and it's important to mention that we have already 73 members from a diversity of countries, small economies, and also for us it's very important to work with the small islands, developing states, and with also least developing countries, SEEDs and LDCs. In conclusion, about your question, Vanessa, I would like to say that our ecological transition strategy considers how to interconnect this global three environmental crises. And therefore, we work and we need to work across different dimensions and with different actors. It's important, the work, as I mentioned, to work at the national level, also at the international level, and with different actors, with a public sector, of course, with private sector, and with civil society in general, with young people, with academia, with scientific community. Gender and intergenerational approaches are also quite important. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And sticking with the international, you mentioned the dialogue on plastics. I see Daniela here in the room. She's, always everywhere in Geneva, promoting this dialogue, engaging with WTO members. Ecuador indeed is a coordinator of this initiative. It would be really interesting to hear a little bit more about the initiative, as well as your views on why it's so interesting and important for developing countries, for small island developing states, for LDCs to be part of this.
Yes, thank you very much, Vanessa. Well, I should start mentioning that 5% of the world trade are plastic products. That's an enormous number of products. And only 10% of those products are being recycled. And just to put an example, we have plastic pollution all over, on the earth, on the air, and also on the oceans. If we do not start tackling plastic pollution, for 2050, we will have more plastic products. And I'm talking about plastic products. I'm not talking about nanoplastics or microplastics. We will have more plastic products on the oceans than fish. And we have a lot of fish in the oceans. So we need to do something, and we need to do something very quick. At the WTO, as you mentioned, we are quite active, and also I thank my colleague Daniela, who is there, working on different issues, and particular in the IDP. Our contribution in the IDP is very important to passes to transmit also to other processes that we are working in different organizations. For instance, again, when we are negotiating on plastic pollution, we need the contributions from the IDP. And we have seen that IDP is contributing already to different processes, as I mentioned, for instance, at WCO, to harmonize systems in the WCO, among others examples that I could put. It's important also the work of the IDP for reducing harmful and unnecessary plastics, and also how to move towards a circular economy from this for plastics. We need to work and move towards a circular economy for plastics. Also, at the IDP, we identify opportunities in trade of environmental goods and services, including technologies. Talking about goods, for instance, it's important to work on environmentally sustainable and effective alternatives and substitutes. And about service and technologies, I have to say that it's important to work on waste management, recycling, cleanup, and ecosystem recovery. Also, we have a collective approach where design, innovation, and standards are relevant when talking about sustainable production. We have also circulated two surveys, one on trade-related measures that countries have implemented to fight plastic pollution. It is important to note that most notifications regarding these measures at the WTO comes from developing countries. Another survey is also on technical assistance and capacity building, where we need to continuously contribute to this excellent exercise in which it's important to listen to developing countries. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Ambassador Valles. For a few more seconds, if I may take more of your time. I wanted to pick up on your points relating to circular economy and the issue of plastics. Do you have a few domestic examples that you might be able to share with us?
Yes, and thank you very much for the question. On June 2021, we implement and adopt the challenge of executing an ecological transition policy. And we are working with this at all levels, at all the institutions here in Ecuador, and also we have the goal of zero net emissions by 2050. Also, we have the legislation on circular economy and the roadmap and the strategy that focuses in different strategies areas. But I would like to mention, for instance, the areas of industrialization and sustainable use of waste, the creation of resilient infrastructure, the development of sustainable businesses, and also the progressive replacement on plastics. We have also a law and regulations on plastic reuse and recycling, and bans plastic on single use. This legislation it has already 2 years been implemented here in Ecuador. And we have also our organic law on inclusive circular economy to establish mechanisms that allows the transition from linear to inclusive circular economy. Also, we are looking to determine obligations, and we have already done obligations to the public sector. And we define principles through this law. We define principles for policies, financing, programs, and projects. And we also encourage research, economic development, employment generation, and innovation. I would like to end, Vanessa, if you allow me, saying also that today, the 28th of July, is a very important day that we have to think a lot about nature. because today, the 28th of July, we have used all the nature resources and also the ecological services that can be regenerated by the earth, or the earth can regenerate. This is an average, this 28th of July. But for instance, for Ecuador, this Overshoot day will be the 6th of December. And there are countries that are working very well. They don't have this Overshoot, but there are countries that they are not doing too well. We have this day, the Overshoot day has been even before the 28th of July. But in average, it's today that we are using more resources than those ones that the earth can regenerate. So that's something that we have to think and we have to work about it. And we are doing that as Ecuador, as I mentioned, in the international level and also at the national and also at the regional level. I thank you very much, Vanessa.
Thank you very much. Indeed, we really have to work on it domestically, regionally, and together internationally. So we're going to come back to the room. And I'm going to turn over to Patrick from Chatham House to zoom back out and give us a broader view on how trade and the circular economy are intertwined. Over to you, Patrick.
Yes, thank you, Vanessa, and also thank you for the invitation to join the meeting today. It's very exciting to be here, have in-person meetings. And it's at Chatham House, we've looked at the interconnection between circular economy and trade for a number of years. And so thank you for the opportunity to be able to share some of our insights. And we've identified many opportunities, but also many barriers that still need to be overcome. But before I go into details on this, I'd just like to mention again, the overall goal of the circular economy is to achieve an absolute reduction in waste, pollution, and unsustainable resource consumption. But it's not only about waste, but it's also a key approach to tackle climate change. It's been highlighted by the latest IPCC report, the Working Group 3 on mitigation. Circular economy and demand side measures are really important to achieve net zero and 1.5 degree targets. And also I want to mention, obviously, it's not just a technical transition, but the social dimension is also really important. And circular economy needs to contribute to poverty eradication and human development objectives. And this is where trade comes in. So to have this inclusive circular economy, international trade will play a key role in the delivery. So no country or company can achieve a circular economy transition in isolation. So while there are some circular economy systems that are local, for example, solutions on city level, countries are generally dependent to varying degrees upon international trade and circular economy enabling traded goods and services, which are either not available domestically or they're not economically feasible to produce domestically. So the other aspect in the pursuit of circularity, the actions that individual countries will take will create effects across global value chains, and that then affects other countries. So an example that's often discussed is shifting to a circular textiles economy will obviously create impacts on producer countries such as Bangladesh or Cambodia, India, China in the manufacturing sector. So therefore, if we want to have a globally inclusive transition, if we want to realize this goal, it's imperative to strengthen collaboration amongst the global community. So when it comes to circular trade flows, they have actually grown strongly in value over the past 2 decades, based on some analysis that we've done of UN Comtrade data. So the value of trade in secondhand goods, secondary materials, and waste for recovery increased by about 230%, from $94 billion to $313 billion between 2000 and 2019. So we see that circular trade is growing, yet linear unsustainable trade is still the norm. So for trade to become a key enabler of the circular economy, a range of regulatory and technical challenges are inhibiting its advancement. These include a lack of mutually recognized definitions, classifications, interoperable standards, regulations, and conformity procedures. And furthermore, as an emerging area activity, the circular economy has itself only been embedded to a limited degree in bilateral, regional, and plurilateral trade and economic cooperation agreements. This restricts the scope and the potential for collaboration around transboundary issues such as legal waste shipments, supply chain transparency and traceability, investment, or issues pertaining to mutual recognition, technical barriers to trade, and trade facilitation.
Thanks so much, Patrick. You piqued my interest a bit. I was thinking about the next question I wanted to ask you, and it was a question about circular economy, trade, and the services sector. It'd be really interesting to hear more about some of the positive impacts you'd see, especially in the context of small business in developing countries and LDCs, because I think one of the questions that we always get are, what are the benefits of circular economy?
Yes, there are multiple benefits, and services play a key role, and we do indeed need more service-based models in the circular economy. So in specific, services that are often mentioned include circular design skills, leasing or rental, and repair services. And there's a lot of space for small businesses to be involved in those activities. One of the terms that's often used is product service systems, PSS is the acronym. So these provide access to product service for a period of time rather than full ownership. And these are widely seen as a key circular economy business model. So in addition, there's trade in circular economy enabling services that would contribute to conducting circular economy activities. And so these are enabling services, which allows countries or companies to access necessary skills and or equipment to implement new circular business models, such as leasing or renting, and to conduct those activities such as reuse, repair, remanufacturing, etc. So there's
while you're finalizing, a few examples, I'm going to ask you to throw in there the relevance to aid for trade and how it could be useful in just a few remarks.
Okay.
Because I know that we're over time. It's really interesting. I'd love to stay here for a couple of more hours. Michael, would that be possible? No. Okay, so in just a few words, if you could wrap up. Thanks, Patrick.
Great. Okay, I'll do that. Just on the case of LDC, so one area of opportunities that we have identified is obviously in the off-grid energy access space. It links to what we heard before about the importance of renewable energy. So there's lots of opportunities to also include maintenance and repair services rather than supplying new products. This can create many opportunities for new business models. And in terms of the role of WTO aid for trade, so there's a really important role to play. So one area is capacity building of circular skills. So this could include the training of industrial actors in necessary circular economy skills for conducting domestic circular activities, training on policy capacity building on policy, but also training of national enforcement agencies to be better able to identify and counter illegal waste shipments. There's an opportunity in the wider context of greening the WTO. So we think circularity should be identified as a core pillar in the pursuit of greening international trade. So aid for trade could also become an important platform to encourage collaboration between donor and recipient countries. There's also opportunities to promote investment in trade-related infrastructure that then facilitate circular economy. Also, aid for trade can play a role in overcoming north-south differences, because at the moment, based on the existing trade structures, countries in the global north are better positioned to generate circular trade opportunities. So there's a need to level the playing field. And maybe just to conclude, what we've done over the last year, we've convened a group of organizations from Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, to create a framework for inclusive circular trade And I won't go into details on this, but there's a session this afternoon at 4:30, which will be moderated by my colleague, Jack Barry. And many of these topics there can be discussed in some more detail.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I'm going to follow up with you after the panel on a few of these issues that you mentioned. So unfortunately, you know, every good thing has to come to an end. But before we come to the very end, allow us to show a short video. We focused very much on mitigation efforts during the discussion. We have a short video from Patrick Verkuin, who's the CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation, talking about climate change adaptation. We know that it's actually really encouraging to see that it's so high on the agenda at the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh this year. So I think it's worth showing that video. If you could have that video, and then we'll close the session. Thank you.
Colleagues, friends, excellencies, Dr. Nkosi Okonjo, colleagues, friends, I am sorry not to be with you in person today, but I would like to thank the World Trade Organization for this opportunity to talk about the Global Center on Adaptation, or GCA's, work and our thinking on how climate finance and trade can be used to scale climate adaptation efforts, because we certainly need to scale up massively and urgently on adaptation. We need to scale now. And the IPCC's most recent report, as you know, lays it out in black and white terms. We will reach critical global warming levels earlier in the century than we previously thought. But our climate is already increasingly erratic today. And Africa in particular, home to the world's fastest growing young population, is on the front line. Africa is especially vulnerable to climate impacts now, exacerbated by food, fuel, and fiscal crisis provoked by the war in Ukraine, as well as the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Trade, as you know, is vital because it cushions the volatility of food markets by providing a vital flow of supplies when domestic crops decline because of the climate emergency. And trade builds resilience through job creation, raising incomes. In essence, it puts food into mouth. GCA, we're boosting climate adaptation across the world, but particularly in Africa. Our Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, the AAAP, is Africa-owned and an Africa-led initiative jointly developed between us and the African Development Bank under the leadership of President Adesina and the African Union led by President Macky Sall. The AAAP is Africa's response to the climate crisis, mobilizing $25 billion for adaptation in the areas of food security, resilient infrastructure, climate finance, and also importantly, youth employment. In its first year, together with the World Trade Organization, I'm proud to report that we have already influenced climate adaptation responses through $3 billion of investments. Our State and Trends in Adaptation report, which we launched last November with President Kenyatta, it identifies a series of climate-related and trade-related action areas for climate change adaptation. We recommend 5 bold areas. 1, improving the functioning of markets for food and agriculture. 2, strengthening policies and institutions for sanitary and phytosanitary measures. 3, reducing barriers for trade in goods, services, and technologies for adaptation. 4, enhancing the climate resilience of transport and other key trade-related infrastructure. And 5, using economic integration policies to promote trade and economic diversification. Guided by these 5 action areas, we're helping to scale up digital solutions through the AAAP. And quite frankly, it's a model that is ready to be scaled up for global impact across the world. Adaptation, colleagues, presents major opportunities and generates economic benefits. For example, every dollar invested in resilient infrastructure yields a $4 dividend. And I mean, how often do you hear of a return on investment like that? Last November, I was delighted with Glasgow's bold ambition on adaptation action. But now let us make sure that the pledge of doubling global climate adaptation finance by 2025 is met. That is why on September 5, GCA is convening the Africa Adaptation Summit in Rotterdam together with President Macky Sall on behalf of the African Union and together with the World Trade Organization's Director General. This is a vital moment leading into COP27 later this year. And that's why the African Union, the African Development Bank, the IMF, the UN, and obviously the World Trade Organization are playing a big role in the summit. It's going to be an opportunity to build support and elevate ambition on adaptation ahead of our meetings in Sharm el-Sheikh. I can only encourage you to get involved. Adaptation needs are growing. So at the same time, adaptation needs to take a giant leap forward. We have the tools, we have the determination, we have the leadership. Let's now get on with it. I thank you.
Super fantastic. I want to start by thanking all of you here in the room, thanking all of you out there on a cloud somewhere for joining us in this session. Thank you to the speakers for the really interesting discussions that we've had this morning. Thank you to Michael, to Vishwa, and the whole of the WTO team for putting this session together and for hosting us. And thank you to DDG Zhang for joining us for this conversation. Enjoy the rest of Aid for Trade, and thank you very much once again.